Alrighty, so it's 10, so I guess we can go ahead and get started. I'd like to introduce Dr. Whoi Cho. He's an assistant professor of applied economics here in the Ness School of Management and Economics. We're super excited to have him here today to present about phosphorus management and economic impacts, especially since today's a holiday here on campus. So we're really grateful you were willing to come in on a holiday and share your knowledge with us.
Yes, Sarah. I'm really super happy that I can present today. Um, like Sarah said, I'm Whoi Cho, who is a new assistant professor of applied economics at Ness School of Management and Economics at South Dakota State University. Um, I've started my job since last fall, so this time is my first presentation in the Ag Econ Dialogue. So I'm really happy to share about my research things. But before moving on to my research talk, I just introduce myself briefly about it. But I'm a talkative person, maybe not like too brief. But I'm originally from rural areas of South Dakota. I mean, like rural areas of South Korea. So sometimes I made a mistake, like South Dakotas and South Korea. So I grew up. Um, I wasn't a farm kid, but my best friends are farm kids. So my childhood's always like playing in a potatoes and then corn ground. But I was always seeing their family was really happy, but they were really struggling with the financial stress. So right now, it's my friends find them another job, and then their family moved to like another business. So my nostalgic experience, like always supporting for a farm, and then missing the farm area. So my really philosophy and then my dream is like supporting the farmers and then make them to live with them really pretty profitable ways. So my research areas are focusing on like how to guide producers and farmers to make them make more money for it. So I've studied at Oklahoma State for 8 years from bachelor, master, and PhD, and that school made me really growing up and a scholar to support the farmers and producers and ranchers. So today's topic is a one piece of my dream, like phosphorus management and economic impact. I'm gonna talk about how to increase profitability for the farmers who are using a phosphorus fertilizers for their farm. So phosphorus is like as y'all know, really, as y'all know, phosphorus is a really essential nutrient for crops. NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, and then potassium. Phosphorus is a really yield limiting factor when they have when they are really low levels and that they have deficiency. So as shown on the picture, these pictures from Kansas State in a low SOP wheat field. When they apply the phosphorus, their really looks really green, and then their yield is gonna come out. But when they have no fertilizers, they're really low yield. So definitely phosphorus required to apply in a low SOP field. And then unlike a nitrogen, phosphorus is an immobile nutrient. So immobile nutrient means phosphorus fertilizers applied to the field that's carry over certain amount of it, so not leaching too much, so we can traceable about the amount how much gonna left on the field and carry over to the next year. So phosphorus management is really important and affordable to us, is possible. So for increasing about profitability for their field. P management is a really important. I've shared the one like short opinion about my friends who are working in agronomy department. He told me that like phosphorus is kind of stock market. When phosphorus fertilizer prices are really low, they need to apply more. Phosphorus fertilizer prices are really high, they apply less because they're gonna be kind of stock market for the later. So that means phosphorus is an immobile nutrient and then they're gonna staking up, we need to like most of them is gonna carry over to the next year. But from economist perspective, I always asking and curious about like how much soil phosphorus on your field, how much soil phosphorus do you have, how much your cash on your like a cash account kind of it. So phosphorus management have like two different ways to find their recommendation rate. One is sufficiency, and the second one is a build maintenance. So efficiency recommendation rate is the concept of feeding crops. So how much crops taken from the field and then applied phosphorus fertilizers. So that way is a utilize available soil phosphorus from field and then save the cost for applying amount of fertilizers. So they requires to supply at least amount of phosphorus. So as shown on the figure, critical level is a that's target. I like to say there's a target level. At the critical level, fertilizer recommendation rate for the sufficiency is a 0, but their yield reached to like a little bit less than 100%. So compared to like high level, crop yield is gonna be 100%. They could reach to it, but even they up, even they applied. I mean, like at the critical level, they requires to apply 0 for a larger rate. So they're reaching to like not non 100%, but that's reaching to 90 to 95% because marginal rate's gonna be different. So even they applied more fertilizers, their increased amount of yield is not gonna be profitable in a short run. So they're targeted to a 90 to 95% of their yield potential. Counterparts, another philosophy of the build maintenance. They're focused on the feed soil. So after the harvest, they want to maintain certain target level for their soil phosphorus even after the harvesting. So biggest difference between the sufficiency is the at the critical level, they require certain amount of fertilizer rate. So that's the crop take amount. So crops taken from the field when they apply the fertilizers, they have to maintain certain level of critical level. So they need to apply more even at the critical level. But positive pros like advantage of a build maintenance is they could guarantee like 100% of maximum yield for their farming. So I made a slide comparison for sufficiency and the build maintenance. Like I said, sufficiency saves the fertilizer cost. So as shown on the figure, sufficiency fertilizer rate is always lower than the build maintenance. At the mostly at the critical task level, like critical target level, build maintenance still requires more fertilizer rate than sufficiency, and then that's gonna be exactly crop uptake amounts. So build maintenance is gonna like guarantee like 5 to 10% more yield than the sufficiency of fertilizers applied to the field. So thinking about the after the harvesting. So build maintenance case, they requires certain amount of fertilizer rate. That's the crop uptake amount. So build maintenance equilibrium soil phosphorus is on their critical levels. But sufficiencies like after the harvest, crops take some, their soil P is gonna shrinking down amount of crop takes, and then they need to ultimately requires same amount of build maintenance, but their equilibrium soil P is gonna be way lower than a build maintenance. So this figure is a little exaggerated, not that much huge decreasing, but um most takeaways from this figure is a sufficiency equilibrium phosphorus is gonna reaching to lower than a build maintenance, like not enough soil test level for the crops, but they still like over the long run they require the same phosphorus fertilizers are gonna apply with the build maintenance ultimately. So over the long run, they're gonna make difference of a yield, but cost is gonna be same. But in the short run, cost gonna be matter. Yield's gonna be even yield's gonna make a little make a difference, but cost is a more larger, so sufficiency is gonna more economic profitable in the short run. So my research question is which way is gonna be better for farmers for phosphorus management perspective. So, this work is one of my dissertation works. That one is does not focus on. I mean, we didn't use an actual data set, so we are using a simulation study. So we assumed several yield functions and then there's all p changes. So I'm gonna little bit explain about for further slide. So like I said, sufficiency is like target could reach to like 90 to 95% of yield. So I collected numbers from the previous literatures for comparing about sufficiency and the build maintenance their yield levels. So like I said, they're ultimately reaching to like same amount of phosphorus fertilizer applied over time, but their equilibrium SOP is going to be different. So I found the numbers with the same amount of fertilizers applied, but their SOP level is a 10 to 20 at the sufficiency and then over 25 for the build maintenance. So in that case, we found average value is going to 7% is a differ statistically significantly. So build if we assume like build maintenance is gonna get 100% of yield potential, sufficiency is gonna get only 93% of yield difference from our study. So we assumed their yield functions, and I use a relative wheat grain yield. This relative wheat grain yield concept is based on percentage of wheat yield goal. So we assumed over the target level for build maintenance, like over 25 ppm, so test level, they could reach to like 100%. And then, like I said, at the equilibrium SOP level, at the with the sufficiency at the 15 SOP ppm, they could reach to 90 or 95%. So we assumed like two different numbers for 90 and then 95%. So also we are considering about in a low soil phosphorus level, even they applied really enough, sometimes excessive amount of phosphorus on the field, crops restricted, like limited to take their phosphorus from the soil. So low soil phosphorus level, even they applied enough recommendation rates, they cannot reach to like 100% or 90 or 95%. So we assumed they're gonna have them like linears. So at the zero level, they when they applied sufficiency or build maintenance, they could reach to like 75% or 87.5% of their yield potential. This one is a recommendation rates difference. So I brought two numbers for each sufficiency and each build maintenance. First one is a sufficiency rate for Oklahoma State one. Oklahoma State's sufficiency rate is just only based on soil test phosphorus. So they're not like adjusted their sufficiency rate for their different yield goals. But Kansas State sufficiency rate is we call them hybrid sufficiency rate. That's a little bit adjusting about yield goals. So when their yield potential is a really high, they a little bit applied more, but they're not over like target level for build maintenance. So build maintenance rate is really requires more fertilizer rate than a sufficiency rate. So in a single year, if they want to like building up to their targets in a low soil phosphorus level field, they requires too much phosphorus in a single years. So that's a really too costly. So farmers do not want to do that. So usually people's recommend like 4 to 8 years for the building up years plan. So divided by 4 or 8, and then depending on their plants, there needs time to staking up and then building up to target level in 4 or 8 years. So OK sufficiency is just based on a soil test phosphorus. So on the table, left columns are 2690 kilogram per hectare yield potential. Okay, and then right column is a 35, like 35 kilogram per hectare yield potential they have. Oklahoma State sufficiency, just based on the soil test phosphorus, they're same regardless of their difference of yield potential. But hybrid sufficiency way is little bit adjusted, so higher yield potential have a higher one. But build maintenance always requires higher than sufficiency. So build maintenance, like in a 4 year build maintenance, they requires more fertilizers than 8 years. So these numbers just brought for explanation about their difference of sufficiency and the build maintenance recommendation rates. So I'm an economist, so always my answers like do not say sufficiency is always better or build maintenance is always better. So always answers are gonna be depends on. So I considered different scenarios. So we are basically use the net present value, like current value for now, over 5 or 10 or 20 years time horizon. So I care about three different yield potential, like 26 dot like 2000 like 2690, 40, 35, 53, 80 kilograms per hectares, and then different time horizons like 5 years, 10 years, and 20 years. And then we assume that their soil phosphorus level, their initial soil phosphorus level at their soil field is a different, like low, medium, and then over their target, like 5, 15, and 25. So 3 times 3, 27 different scenarios we considered. This result is showing about their soil phosphorus level changes. So on the figures by columns, they differ. So their yield potential is gonna differ by columns, and then their initial soil phosphorus levels are gonna differ by row. So all the figures on the top two, like there's dot little long dot line, two long dot lines stand for build maintenance one. So light long dot line is a build maintenance with the 4 years planning. So in the 4 years, they're reaching to the target level and then maintain straight for the over 25. And in 8 years, build maintenance is gonna maintain of it. So all cases build maintenance maintain certain over level for target level. And the sufficiency is gonna a little bit different by two different ones. So solid line is Oklahoma State one, depending on their soil test phosphorus level. So when they have low yield goals, their equilibrium soil phosphorus level is a higher, and then when yield goal is higher than others, their solid sufficiency soil phosphorus levels are reached to like lower than high like lower soil phosphorus level. So going to like right one, their ultimate equilibrium soil phosphorus level is keep decreasing with the solid lines. Unlike so sufficiency is the higher yield potential is the lower equilibrium soil P level. When yield adjusted sufficiency, like hybrid sufficiency way, the equilibrium soil phosphorus is really similar to build maintenance, but they're reached to like 15 ppm, so way lower than build maintenance equilibrium soil phosphorus level. And then this result is a one part of my table for the net present value. So left column is yield potential. I mean, rows gonna yield potentials, and then columns gonna initial soil phosphorus level, regardless of their soil phosphorus level, yield potential, same result, but depending on the timelines, they're gonna have a little different. So in a short run, like 5 years, hybrid sufficiency is gonna profitable than others way. And then long runs like over 10 and then 20 build maintenance is gonna profitable than others. So short run yield gains not gonna be covered for their more cost for making building up to the target, but long run their yield gains gonna be like more economically advantage than they're saving the cost. So this research is a really simple like long term build maintenance is gonna be better. So for farmers having like over 10 or 20 years, like you don't have any like retirement plan, like 5 years, definitely applied phosphorus following a build maintenance way. But if you are planning to retire in 5 years or your field is struggling with them like low yield fields, you need to follow the sufficiency recommendation rates. So my work is based on the numbers from Oklahoma wheat. So I just want to talk about South Dakota State's situation right now. So where we stand, where South Dakota stand right now. So from a 2019 survey, South Dakota Corn Nutrient Management Practices, that surveys, I just cropped one table about their interesting result. When they ask about like how much phosphorus fertilizers applied on your field, 80% of farmers answered like apply enough for the current cropping season and 12 for next two cropping season and then only 1% for next three cropping seasons. So I feel like most of them's just based on single years um, single year plan and then they just follow sufficiency approach. So current SDSU extension offers like caring about yield goal and the soil test phosphorus. So they're using hybrid sufficiency recommendation rate. So in the short run, in a single year or in a 2 years, definitely South Dakota farmers gonna get a profitable money from it. But on if they are farming a more longer time, they're gonna they need to apply more and then focus on the building up their souls. So right now is my student and I are working on with the actual yield data from the South Dakota and then trying to find a phosphorus recommendation rate for corn and soybean farmers. We are a little struggling to find a data set right now, but at least we have a data set and then we are working on. So pretty soon we're gonna get results and then present in front of y'all again about like how much you need to apply for it. So thank you very much. My presentation is really quick and then short, but I just want to say about like build maintenance approaches definitely need to for farmers if they have long-term plans for the farmings. And then if you have any questions, just ask me right now or send an email or just call me. So appreciate to come to my presentation today.
Thank you so much, Wee. That was a really nice presentation and really relevant to think about, especially in this type of year where we're facing these low commodity prices and higher costs. So we'll open up the floor. If anyone has questions, feel free to unmute yourself, shout them out, drop them in the chat, or like we said, just drop them an email or give them a call. So give you a minute or two if you want to ask any questions. And I did have one question for you.
Okay.
So you were talking about the long-term versus short-term strategy for farmers to
Mhm.
use with their phosphorus applications. Have you thought about on owned versus rented land, what that strategy would be, or do you think farmers should use different strategy on owned versus rented land?
Yeah, but so I just thought about that. So rent is a more like spending in the short run. So definitely rented people have to apply for the sufficiency because that's more focused on like their not day by day, but short term profitability. That matters. If they are owned, like definitely they need to follow a bill maintenance approach. So I didn't consider that numbers into our simulation model because we already consider so many scenarios and then we have no actual data. But definitely I'm gonna work on like input, like putting that information for our future study and then giving a more practical guidelines for it. So that's a really great question. Thank you.
Thank you. And we had one question come in. Would phosphorus levels applied to fields need to change if farmers are rotating crops?
That's a really great question. So my answer is gonna be yes, maybe, but I've so my simulation work is just only continuous wheat crops, and then my student and I are working on for crop soybean rotation cases. So my hypothesis, and then so far our answer is gonna be might be changed depending on their rotating crops, but I can't say it's the true. I can't say it's the true, but that might be they need to change their rates by crops.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and shift gears a little bit. I'm going to talk about the yield trap, which I think will fit really nicely with what we presented, this whole idea of optimizing inputs. Okay, so this is my work. It's called the yield trap. This is a project that's been going on since 2015. I've been working on this for 6 years, so this was part of my three studies for my PhD dissertation. This data and the work is based in Illinois, but at the end I'll talk about kind of how it fits with South Dakota and then future plans for work in South Dakota. But this is a joint project between Precision Conservation Management, Illinois Corn Growers Association, and the University of Illinois. So this is a project led by Dr. Gary Schnitke, the soybean endowed Chair of Agricultural Strategy at the University of Illinois, and Dr. Laura Gentry, the Director of Water Quality at the Illinois Corn Growers Association. So I want to talk about kind of the philosophy behind yield maximization versus profit maximization. So for years, we've seen really a push for yield maximization, or this idea that farmers need to get as high of yields as possible. And while that's a good way to think and a good way to be, it doesn't exactly line up with what we need to think about economically. So we know at some point for a lot of our inputs, we reach a point called diminishing marginal returns. So where the cost of applying one more unit of input or so many thousand more seeds does not cover the additional yield gain that we get from completing that application. So we reached what we consider an economically optimal rate. And this may not necessarily be the same as the optimal yield. Optimizing profit and optimizing yield can be two different points. So what we've been trying to work on is shifting farmers towards this idea of thinking about optimizing profits instead of optimizing yield. So trying to find that optimal nitrogen rate or optimal seeding rate, things like that. So for this project, we collected data from all across Illinois. This data is all at the field level. It comes from actual farmers who are doing these practices on their fields all across Illinois, so that we have 16 counties enrolled in this program, but it encompasses 28 different counties in Illinois, depending on where the fields are located. So it's a big project. It's expanding into other states. They're collecting data in Nebraska and Missouri. So I hope that this is something that will continue to expand because I think it's really valuable. And I should mention that Precision Conservation Management was launched in response to the Illinois Nutrient Loss Reduction Strategy. So in Illinois, there's been some concerns with runoff from fields, leaching into the Mississippi River and ending up in the Gulf of Mexico. So trying to think about practical ways to help farmers optimize nutrient applications and then trying to reach these nutrient reduction goals, which have been set in Illinois. So we're supposed to reduce levels by certain amounts in Illinois water bodies, but by 2030, there's certain timeline we're supposed to meet. So this project was launched in response to that goal. So how it works is the farmer goes into this precision conservation management portal with the help of their specialists. So each farmer is assigned a precision conservation management specialist. So the farmer and the specialist sit down side by side and they enter all the data together. So this ensures the accuracy of our data and ease of use for our farmers. So they enter their data into this secure online portal, which is managed by the Heartland Science and Technology Group. So we don't have any access to the personal data of the farmers. So when we get the data about the agricultural practices, that we don't know the latitude and longitudes of the farms, we don't know farmer names, any of that data, it's all kept very anonymous. And this is to keep the farmer data very secure, because we know there's probably a lot of people who would love to have their hands on farmer nutrient application rate data. And what we want to do is be as careful and secure with the farmer data as possible. We want to protect them because the main goal of this project is to help farmers, to help them optimize their rates, to collect data that they can use to benchmark against other farmers and to help utilize on their own farms. So the data is kept very secure to keep that from falling in the wrong hands. And so what we do is we collect data about every pass done to the field. A farmer chooses which fields to enroll, how many fields they want to enroll, and then they enter data about everything done to that field. So they enter what crops are planted there, they enter the systems, whether that's conventional, non-GMO, and then every pass across the field gets entered into the system. So the rates at which they're applying, what type of tillage they're doing, their seeding rates. So we collect all the information about any practice done to the field, and it's all entered into the secure online portal. What we don't collect is any financial information from the farmers. So we don't know anything about what they sold their grain for or how much they're paying for their inputs. Instead, we assign standard prices and costs across all farmers. So the reason we do this is, one, we don't necessarily want to collect all this financial data from farmers. You know, it would be interesting, but I think not right now. And two, there's definitely some variability in that data that would come from marketing ability or volume discounts. So some farmers get a different price on inputs depending on how much they farm. So by assigning these standard prices and costs, we remove all that variability from kind of those marketing or cost difference factors, and we assign standard prices and costs for across all farms. So then all the variation in the financial outcomes is driven by the differences in practices they're using and the differences in yield. So then what the farmer gets is they get a report based on this standardized data. And the ultimate output is this number at the bottom, which is their operator land return. So they can see what their return is for each of their fields and what practices they're doing. And we can compare this across farmers. We can compare this across years. So we're collecting data on the same fields year after year. So it's a really interesting data set we can use to look at kind of the impact of some of these practices across time on farmers' yield and also on farmers' finances. And then we also provide them some sustainability reports. So farmers receive a score based on the practices they're doing, so they can see potentially how much greenhouse gas emissions they're generating, or they get a sustainability score. So they can look at that too, compare it to what other farmers are doing, and then think about, you know, where they want to be on that, and then ways to maybe monetize that or reduce that or things like that. So, but that's just for internal farmer use for comparison. So we don't work with that sustainability data in this research. So two of the questions that I wanted to ask related to this data are related to nitrogen use in Illinois. So growing up, I grew up in Illinois on a farm in West Central Illinois, living and working there for, you know, my undergrad and my PhD. I experienced this firsthand, and I had two major questions. So we have a nitrogen recommendation in Illinois. It's called the Maximum Return to Nitrogen. It's an online calculator, so farmers can go into this calculator, they can enter their region, they can enter their crop rotation, and they can enter a nitrogen price and a corn price, And then based on the research data from farms in Illinois, from the University of Illinois research farms, it'll output this graph, which is their maximum return to nitrogen graph. So this is basically what I was talking about earlier. Their optimal nitrogen, it gives them an optimal nitrogen rate based on the financial conditions and based on the yield data from Illinois research, the research farms across Illinois. So it'll give them the MRTN rate would be their optimal rate based on the data they've entered. So here, for example, it's 187 pounds of nitrogen per acre. And then it also gives them a profitable range, which is within plus or minus $1 of net return. So you'll see that that's, for example, for this field in central Illinois, corn following soybeans, it's 173 to 202. So it's a really interesting tool, but not a lot of farmers are using it. And we find very few farmers are actually following the MRTN recommendation. So I was really curious as to why farmers weren't using the recommendation and what goes into that. And then I also want to investigate nitrogen timing. So in Illinois, we still have quite a bit of fall anhydrous ammonia applied. And there's been some push to get farmers thinking about applying that in season or in the spring. So I wanted to investigate the finances of that. So a lot of farmers will say, well, fall anhydrous ammonia is the cheapest source of nitrogen, so that's why I do it. But I wanted to see if that was actually what we find in the data, if that really is the most profitable way to apply nitrogen in Illinois. And again, I know it's different here in South Dakota. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but I think it's definitely interesting what we find. And I just want to mention that SDSU, we have our own fertilizer recommendations guide. So this has all of our recommendations for nitrogen here. It's published by Jason Clark he's our soil fertility specialist for SDSU Extension, and he's assistant professor in agronomy. So if you're interested in seeing our recommendations for South Dakota, you can go to his fertilizer guide. It will tell you all the nitrogen recommendations, all the phosphorus recommendations for all different crops. So it's really a comprehensive and useful guide. Now I'd like to talk about the results from our nitrogen study. So the first study I wanted to answer two questions. Do farmers who follow that university recommendation, the MRTN, have higher yields or profits than farmers who do not? Then I also want to see which nitrogen timing results in the highest yields and returns. As I mentioned, not a lot of farmers in Illinois are using that MRTN. So in our data set, we find 68% of the fields receive a nitrogen application above the MRTN profitable range. So most of those applications we're seeing are 20, 30 pounds above the MRTN, but we do see some outliers. We see some fields that receive pretty high nitrogen applications, 300 pounds an acre plus. So we really want to try to figure out what's going on there and try to give farmers information to help them think about their nitrogen application decision. Now I'll skip kind of the statistical analysis because that's usually not very interesting, but what we were able to do is because we observed the same fields over time, with the data from 2015 to 2022, we're usually observing it every other year in a corn soybean rotation. So we're able to utilize that data set to control for some of these external factors like weather or soil type that affect the outcomes. So if we control for these over time, these are the results we found, again, from 2015 to 2022. So that's 8 years, but we're usually observing the field every other year. So technically 4 years. So what we found was that applying above the MRTN, the university recommendation, increased the yield in our data set, but it did not increase returns compared to applying at the university recommendation. So those farmers who were applying above that university recommendation, they were getting higher yields, but that wasn't translating into higher returns. They were actually statistically the same as the university nitrogen recommendation returns. And then for the timing question, we found that the 50% pre-plant, 50% post-plant nitrogen timing had 7 bushel per acre higher yield compared to fall nitrogen. However, we didn't find any statistically significant differences in nitrogen timing. So a farmer applying nitrogen in the fall in our data set in Illinois would have the same profitability as a farmer applying 50% pre-plant, 50% post-plant. But it did have slightly higher yield if you apply in-season nitrogen. So what this means is that farmers could, in theory, reduce their nitrogen applications to the MRTN or change their nitrogen applications to the spring without losing any profitability. So that's the message that's the ultimate result of this study. So hopefully this will provide some evidence to help farmers kind of think about those nitrogen decisions and potentially move towards different practices if they see this financial evidence. The next step we want to do is, well, what are the characteristics of those people who are applying at the MRTN? So, and one of our main takeaways is that sometimes the people we think are or aren't using the MRTN, maybe they have characteristics that we didn't realize. So maybe we should target some of those farmers who we think should be using the MRTN based on their characteristics, but are not. So as I mentioned, again, most farmers are applying above the university recommendation in Illinois, 68% of the fields. 26% of the fields receive an application at the university nitrogen recommendation. And 6% of our fields were receiving a nitrogen application below the university recommendation. So for this study, what we found, again, we couldn't prove causality, so we can't say that these characteristics caused farmers to apply more or less nitrogen. But what we did was find characteristics associated with adopting the MRTN, so adopting this university nitrogen recommendation. So farmers who planted cover crops, who were enrolled in an NRCS program, or were using strip till or no-till, they were more likely to follow the university nitrogen recommendation. Farmers who had any nitrogen custom applied by an ag retailer were less likely to follow the MRTN. So in Illinois, farmers can either apply the nitrogen themselves, or a lot of them have their nitrogen custom applied by an ag retailer. So kind of the idea there is maybe the ag retailer would be more involved in their nitrogen decision if the farmer were having the nitrogen custom applied versus whether they were doing it themselves. And I'm still looking for some evidence, but I found some evidence from some of the ag retailers that maybe they were using some of the previous recommendations. So before 2005, we had a different nitrogen recommendation in Illinois that would result in much higher nitrogen application rates than the MRTN, the new university recommendation. So I found some evidence that maybe that previous recommendation was still lingering around. I found, one publication on a ag retailer's website. They had the previous recommendation and the MRTN actually side by side, comparing them and saying that you could use either one, which from an extension standpoint is not true. But I think that old university recommendation and recommended rates could still be lingering out there in the field, even though we switched, Illinois Extension switched in 2005. So it's been a while. And finally, I want to talk about our cover crop study. This was our third essay. So what we wanted to do was see the effect of tillage and cover crops on yield and profit. So again, a very practical, very applied study for farmers in Illinois. We filtered this out. So this is only for conventional non-manured soybean fields. So the nitrogen studies were on corn, of course. So now we're going to shift gears to soybeans. And again, that's 2015 to 2022, but typically it's a corn soybean rotation. So we're only seeing that field in the data every other year. But again, it's very valuable because we can observe the same fields over time. So there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that, okay, if you use cover crops for so many years, they'll pay for themselves. I've seen extension publications say three years of cover crops will pay for themselves, or, you hear a lot of different stuff, but we wanted to see if some of these anecdotes were actually true and if this is what we see in the data. So the most we observe the fields is 5 times, but typically 4 or 5 times. So again, it's 8 years, but about 4 or 5 years typically because of the crop rotation. And this data represents 370 farmers, 3,074 fields, and 5,292 field observations. So like I said, we're observing the same fields over time, so we're able to kind of control for that and see what happens. And each field in the data set is assigned into a different benchmark based on the practices that are being performed. So for our tillage benchmarks, we have no-till, strip till, 1 pass of tillage, 2 passes of tillage, or 3 or more passes of tillage. So in the data set, we break these out more depending on implement, but for this study, we consolidate them basically just into 1, 2, or 3 passes, and then strip till or no till. So not really on the type of implement, but more just on the number of passes. Then for cover crops, we collect data about whether the cover crop is overwintering or winter terminal. We collect a lot of data about what type of seeds are used, if it's a blend of seeds. But for this study, we're just looking at whether the field had cover crop or no cover crop. Initially, we tried to break it out by overwintering and winter terminal crops to see if there was some difference in profitability based on the type of cover crop, but we didn't have enough data to be able to do that analysis. And so we had to aggregate the data, just cover crop or no cover crop, to see the effect. But hopefully this program's continuing year after year. We're getting more data. So it'd be interesting eventually to see if we could see a difference based on type of cover crop or overwintering versus winter terminal. So again, I'm going to skip over the statistical analysis, but it's the same idea that we have this nice panel data set so we can observe the same fields over time. We can control for the weather and some of these field characteristics because we can see these fields year after year. And what we find in this study is that no-till systems reduce yield by 1 bushel per acre, but they don't reduce profit. The only tillage system we found that consistently reduces profit is a 3-pass tillage system. So that reduces a farmer's profit by $27 per acre, less profit when comparing that to a 1-pass tillage system. And then 1, 2, strip till and no-till statistically all have the same profit. So you could do any of those tillage systems and receive the same profit within the results we found in this data set. We found that cover crops did not affect yield, so we didn't see a yield increase or decrease from cover crops. Again, this is over 8 years, but usually observing that field 4 or 5 times. So 4 or 5 observations of a cover crop field. And cover crops decreased profit by $40 per acre in our findings. So if we're not seeing any difference in yield in the data set, and then we're incurring some additional costs, so we have cover crop seed and planting and potentially cover crop termination costs. So with no statistically significant yield advantage and those additional costs, it makes sense that we would see a decrease in profit. So basically what we find is that farmers, and again, this is for Illinois, so not for South Dakota, farmers can do any tillage system besides 3 or more passes of tillage and be equally as profitable. So there's been a lot of push to switch to no-till, but this makes sense, that we can see all these different types of tillage systems and farmers using most of them because there doesn't seem to be a clear advantage when it comes to strip till, 1 passes of tillage, 2 passes of tillage, or no-till, a significant financial difference between them. So you're probably wondering, okay, this is interesting, but what do I do with this information? I'm in South Dakota, I'm not in Illinois. How can I apply this to South Dakota agriculture? And I do think, probably the research questions we would need to ask here are very different. We don't have very many people applying fall nitrogen, so we don't have some of the same problems that we were trying to solve in Illinois. So this is from that same publication that we showed earlier, the fertilizer survey, which was conducted in 2019. You can find that on the SDSU extension website, that full publication. It's really interesting. But what they found was that, very few people apply fall anhydrous ammonia here in South Dakota. Most of the farmers are already applying nitrogen in season. Most nitrogen applications are urea or UAN and occurring in the spring. So the same shift we're trying to get data to help farmers make in Illinois has already happened here. You're already doing that. And also with the rates. So when I look at the fertilizer recommendation guide for South Dakota, and then I look at this fertilizer study of the rates we're seeing in South Dakota being applied, it's spot on. I mean, farmers are already following, or appear to be from my observations, following the South Dakota State University nitrogen recommendation. So we don't see the same problems here in South Dakota that we were trying to see in Illinois and solve with this data ultimately. So what do you do with that information? I think no matter where you're at, you can always revisit your application rates, reviewing that SDSU fertilizer recommendation document, reviewing your own data, kind of thinking about that yield maximization versus profit maximization mindset. I think this year might not be the year for experimenting with new practices. For example, cover crops. I know it's a different condition. here in South Dakota with cover crops too as well. So the Illinois results aren't directly applicable to you, but with what we're seeing this year, there's, as you all probably already know, low commodity prices, higher input prices, and then with this risk of tariffs and market disruptions, it's been a really stressful time for farmers, and it appears it's going to continue to be a stressful time economically. So this might not be the year for experimenting with new practices like cover crops, because we know there are some risk, there is some learning curve to these practices, and there's some financial risk to doing that. Another thing you could consider if you want to experiment with some of these practices, some additional revenue streams or funding sources to experiment with these new practices. So we have a lot of experiments and programs going on here at SDSU that will compensate farmers to try some of these practices. So then you're taking some of that risk off yourself, and if you're wanting to try cover crops or some other new practice. And then I'm involved with, for example, a program called Data Intensive Farm Management. So what we're trying to do is help farmers optimize their nutrient application by using their precision data. And the program offers a no-loss guarantee. So we look at the data afterwards, and if you lose money, we'll compensate you that difference. So I think participating in some of these programs or government programs like EQIP to try some of these practices, especially during these more stressful financial times, is a smart economic decision. So I guess what I could use help with is what applied economic research questions can we help with in South Dakota? So as I showed you, the project in Illinois has been going on since 2015. It's a lot of data, a lot of work. It's taken some time to get to where we are there. And I know it's not perfectly applicable to you in South Dakota, but I came here in August 2023. So it's been a process shifting and learning about South Dakota agriculture and the unique problems you face here. And as I showed, you don't really have the same problems we see with nitrogen application in Illinois. So I'd be curious to know what you think we could collect data on to help you the best and help our South Dakota farmers the best. Because it's going to take a couple years for me to get that data and start answering these South Dakota research questions. But I hope in the meantime you found what we've been working on interesting, and if you have some guidance for me of what we can help you with economically here in South Dakota to investigate and help farmers here in the state. So I'll open it up for if you have any thoughts on this or any questions for me. I'd be happy to take questions. Happy to know what you think. So the nitrogen recommendation take into consideration the quality of the produce, or is it solely focused based on yield? So the recommendation is solely focused on yield and nitrogen price. So it's not taking into like one of the main criticism for the Illinois recommendation. Again, the South Dakota recommendation is slightly different the way they do and calculate that, but it's the same idea of using the research farm data to try to come up with a recommendation that's accurate for the region. So it's doing the same thing. But the Illinois recommendation, it's solely based on the nitrogen corn price ratio. So it's based on the yield and it's based on the price. So it doesn't take into factor, I mean, it tries to take in factor land quality a little bit. So you can choose your region. You can choose North, Central, or Southern Illinois. So our most profitable region is Central. That's where our better soils are Central and North, and then the glacier didn't reach Southern Illinois. So you see your lower quality soils there. So they try to differentiate a little bit, but it's hard to do that with that data, so it's not taking into account soil type. It's not taking into account weather expectations, which we all know affect nitrogen application and how much nitrogen is needed for the plant. But yeah, I mean, they're going back and looking at their data, they do a pretty good job get it with that nitrogen profitable range. So we took the data and we actually went back and looked and said, okay, what's the actual economically optimal nitrogen rate for our data? And what did the MRT recommend at that time? And I think it was, 5 out of 8 years, they're within that range. So they're throwing the dart and they're getting pretty close to the bullseye, but it's really hard to get that bullseye. But good question. Great. Well, if you have any more questions, feel free to, you can email me, you can call me, send me a message. Happy to chat anytime. And next month, we'll have the May Ag Economic Dialogue. We'll be hearing about planting progress and acreage expectations. So just thinking about the upcoming crop year and some expectations for that. And we'd really like to thank you for your time, for being here with us today. And we want to wish everybody a very happy Easter and a wonderful spring.
Thank you, Sarah.